I had just come home from work, exhausted and ready to unwind, when I found it waiting for me, this elegant, glossy envelope resting on my kitchen counter. I remember thinking how out of place it looked among the pile of everyday junk mail. Curiosity got the best of me, and without much thought, I tore it open, expecting maybe some promotion or party invitation from a distant acquaintance. Inside was a wedding invitation. Not just any wedding, thought it was for Emily and Alex, my younger sister Emily and my ex-fiancé Alex. The names stood out in bold letters, practically jumping off the card and smacking me in the face. I reread it 3 times, each word sinking in a little deeper. Emily, Alex, wedding. Next month. It was all there, as clear as day. I felt a jolt of disbelief. It had to be some kind of sick joke. But it wasn't. The invitation was real, and they were getting married. In 4 weeks. I stood there frozen, clutching that piece of paper like it might disappear if I held on tight enough. I couldn't process how it had come to this. Emily and Alex? Together? And a wedding already planned? I couldn't wrap my head around it. My mind was racing. There had to be some mistake. Maybe a mix-up at the printer or something. I grabbed my phone and dialed Emily's number, my heart pounding. Straight to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. Voicemail. Again. A part of me wondered if she was deliberately ignoring me. I shot off a text, something simple but direct. Emily, what the hell is going on? Call me. I sat on the couch, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline, waiting. When Emily didn't respond, I called my mom. No answer. My dad? Same thing. It was like they had all gone radio silent. I even considered calling Alex, though the thought of hearing his voice again made me feel sick. Instead, decided to give it a few hours, hoping someone would eventually get back to me and tell me this was all some huge misunderstanding. Later that evening, my mom finally called. She was cheerful as ever, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. After a few pleasantries, I cut straight to the point and asked about the invitation. Oh, that, she said, casually, like we were discussing weekend plans, not my sister marrying my ex. We were going to tell you at the family dinner this weekend. It's really not that big of a deal, sweetheart. We thought you'd be happy for them. Happy? Happy for them? I could barely believe my ears. I stammered something about how out of the blue this was, how no one had bothered to tell me anything, and all she could do was dismiss my shock like it was nothing. Sarah, you really need to let this go. It's been long enough. Emily and Alex found love, and that's a good thing. You should support them. In fact, Emily wanted to ask you something. I couldn't even begin to guess what she could possibly want from me. Before I could get a word in, Mom dropped the bombshell. She was hoping you'd be her maid of honor. My stomach dropped. Maid of honor? At her wedding to my ex? Was this a joke? The sheer audacity of it all made me feel like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I felt dizzy just thinking about it. I barely managed to get out a "you're kidding," right? But she wasn't. Mom went on, explaining how Emily thought it would be a nice way to show we're still close as sisters, how it would mean so much to her if I could just be there for her special day. I wanted to scream. Be there for her? After what she had done? And Alex, how could they possibly think this would be okay? None of it made sense. I asked my mom if they really expected me to stand up there, smiling, pretending everything was fine while they got married right in front of me. Her response was something along the lines of, "Family comes first, Sarah. You need to put your feelings aside for the sake of your sister's happiness. This is about her, not you." I sat there, dumbfounded. This wasn't about me, sure, but how could they act like I didn't matter at all? Like my history with Alex and the way things had ended was just some insignificant footnote. I told her I needed time to think about it, and she seemed surprised that I wasn't jumping at the chance to be the maid of honor. "Just think about it, okay," she said before hanging up, as if that would somehow make me feel better about the whole situation. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head, trying to figure out where everything had gone so horribly wrong. How had Emily and Alex even gotten together? When did this start? And why did no one bother to tell me? By the next morning, I decided I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait for them to be handed to me. If Emily and Alex weren't going to explain themselves, then I would get my answers at that family dinner. I knew there would be no avoiding it. The dinner was set for the weekend, and while part of me wanted to skip it altogether, the other part of me, probably the more stubborn part, needed to face them. I needed to hear it from their own mouths how they could do this, how they thought this was okay. The days leading up to the dinner felt endless. I didn't hear anything more from Emily, and my texts to her went unanswered. It was as if she had already moved on, like my feelings about all this didn't even register in her world. Meanwhile, I kept playing out different scenarios in my head, preparing myself for whatever explanations or excuses they would throw at me. By the time Saturday rolled around, I wasn't even sure what I expected anymore. But one thing was certain, I was going to that dinner, and I wasn't leaving without the truth. Saturday came faster than I expected, and I found myself standing outside my parents' house, feeling a tight knot in my stomach. The place looked the same, warm, welcoming, like nothing was out of the ordinary. But tonight was different. I knew once I walked in, everything was about to change. I took a deep breath, opened the front door, and stepped inside. The familiar smell of my mom's cooking hit me instantly, and the sounds of chattering filled the air. Everyone was already there, my parents, a few cousins, and of course Emily and Alex. The minute I saw them sitting together, side by side, laughing with the rest of the family, it felt like a punch to the gut. I greeted everyone as normally as I could, but I could feel the tension building inside me. The awkwardness of it all was almost suffocating. No one seemed fazed by the fact that I was there, like they had all decided to just carry on with the evening as if nothing had happened. Emily and Alex didn't even look my way. Dinner was served not long after, and we all sat around the long dining table. The conversation flowed easily, though I barely paid attention. It felt like I was watching everything unfold through a fog, only half aware of what people were saying. All I could focus on was the fact that Emily and Alex were sitting across from me, acting completely normal, like I wasn't even in the room. I kept expecting someone to say something, to address the obvious tension, but nothing. My mom kept the conversation light, chatting about random family news, while my dad seemed more focused on his meal than anything else. No one was acknowledging the elephant in the room. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Emily cleared her throat and smiled. So she began, glancing at Alex. "We have something to share." Everyone looked at her expectantly, but I already knew what was coming. My heart raced as she continued, beaming, "Alex and I are engaged." There it was. The words hung in the air for a moment, and the rest of the family erupted into congratulatory cheers, clapping and smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat there, frozen, watching them hug and congratulate Emily and Alex while completely ignoring the fact that I was sitting right there. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, excusing myself as politely as I could, and made my way into the kitchen. I needed a moment to breathe, to collect myself. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Emily following me in. She looked at me with a half-apologetic, half-expectant expression. I wasn't sure what she was expecting me to say, but I wasn't about to let her brush this off like it was nothing. I confronted her right there in the kitchen, demanding to know how she could do this. How could she betray me like this? Getting engaged to Alex of all people. Emily didn't seem the least bit fazed. She shrugged, almost casually, and said something about how love happens, that it wasn't planned, that they just fell for each other after Alex and I had broken up. She made it sound so simple, as if the fact that Alex and I had a whole history together didn't matter anymore. Before I could say anything else, Alex walked in, joining the conversation. His presence only made things worse. He stood there, calm as ever, and tried to explain that he and Emily didn't mean to hurt me, that things just happened between them. It was the same excuse, over and over, like they thought I'd just accept it and move on. I didn't even know what to say. My mind was reeling, and the anger bubbling inside me was getting harder to contain. How could they both stand there, acting like this was some inevitable twist of fate? How could they expect me to be okay with it? As if on cue, my parents walked into the kitchen, having clearly sensed the tension. My mom was the first to speak, urging me to calm down. She insisted that I needed to be supportive, that this was Emily's happiness, and I shouldn't ruin it by making a scene. My dad chimed in too, telling me that it was time to let go of the past and move on. They spoke to me like I was the problem here, like I was the one causing the issue by being upset. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they all be so dismissive, so willing to sweep everything under the rug? It was like no one cared how much this hurt me, how much of a betrayal this felt like. My frustration boiled over, and before I knew it, I was accusing Emily and Alex of betrayal right in front of everyone. Emily didn't even flinch. Instead, she threw it right back at me, accusing me of being selfish, of not being able to let go of the past. She said I was the one holding on to old wounds and that I needed to grow up and accept that people move on. Her words stung. But more than that, they made me realize just how little she seemed to care about the damage she had caused. The argument only escalated from there. I felt like I was the only one fighting for something that mattered, while everyone else just stood by, insisting that I should let it go. It was like no one could see how wrong this all was. Eventually, my dad stepped in, telling me that enough was enough. He looked at me with disappointment in his eyes and told me to grow up. That was the final straw. I had nothing left to say. I grabbed my coat, ready to leave. But just before I walked out the door, I glanced back at the table. That's when I saw a quick, fleeting look between Emily and Alex. It was subtle, but something about it made me pause. It was like there was more going on than they were letting on. Something they weren't saying. I couldn't put my finger on it, but that look felt. Without another word, I left the house, my mind racing with questions. There was something they weren't telling me, something more to this whole situation, and I wasn't about to let it go without finding out the truth. After leaving my parents' house that night, my mind was spinning. The suspicious look Emily and Alex had exchanged at dinner stuck with me, nagging at the back of my thoughts. Something was off, and I couldn't just let it go. The next morning, I called Lisa, my best friend, and filled her in on everything. She listened carefully as I recounted the entire dinner, every awkward interaction, every evasive answer. By the end of it, she was just as shocked as I was. Lisa was always the rational one, but even she agreed that something wasn't adding up. As we sat in my living room, piecing together the timeline of events, things began to seem suspicious. Emily and Alex had apparently fallen in love. After Alex and I broke up, but looking back, there were plenty of moments that now felt like red flags. "Do you remember that time Emily insisted on tagging along when we all went to that concert?" Lisa asked. I did remember. At the time, I thought Emily was just trying to be part of the group, but now it seemed strange. She had spent most of the night talking to Alex, even though she didn't know him that well back then. The more Lisa and I talked, the more incidents like that came to mind. Emily had been showing an unusual interest in Alex for months before we broke up, but I had been too blind to notice. She was always asking about him, going out of her way to be around when we had plans, even texting him from time to check in. I brushed it off then, assuming she was just being friendly. Now, though, it seemed like she was planting the seeds for something more. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Lisa and I spent hours scouring social media, going through old posts, photos, and comments. I wasn't sure what we'd find, but something told me there was more to this story than what they were telling me. Sure enough, the clues started to appear. First, we found a photo from a mutual friend's birthday party, a party I hadn't attended because I was out of town for work. In the picture, Emily and Alex were sitting next to each other, way too close for comfort. They weren't doing anything overtly suspicious, but the way they were leaning toward each other, the subtle touch of Emily's hand on Alex's arm, it all screamed of a connection that shouldn't have been there. That photo was from a month before Alex and I broke up. Then, we found the check-ins. I hadn't noticed it at the time, but Emily and Alex had been at the same places on multiple occasions before we officially ended things. A coffee shop here, a random bar there, innocent enough on their own, but together they painted a picture of two people spending a lot of time together behind my back. The final piece was a string of comments on Alex's posts. Emily had been flirting with him in plain sight, little inside jokes, teasing remarks that seemed harmless at the time but took on a whole new meaning now. It was clear that whatever had started between them had been brewing for a while, long before Alex and I were over. Armed with this evidence, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them directly from Emily. So I drove to her apartment that afternoon, determined to confront her. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she looked surprised but not particularly concerned. I didn't waste time with small talk. I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos, the check-ins, the comments. I demanded to know how long it had been going on. At first, Emily tried to downplay it, saying that it wasn't what it looked like, that I was overreacting, but I wasn't buying it. I pressed harder, not giving her room to dodge the questions. Finally, after a few minutes of back and forth, she admitted it. She told me that she and Alex had started seeing each other while he and I were still engaged. It had started off innocently enough, she claimed, just hanging out, getting to know each other, but eventually they couldn't help falling in love. She said it like it was some inevitable, tragic love story, as if betraying me was just an unfortunate side effect of their undeniable connection. I stood there, stunned by how casually she was admitting to all of it. There wasn't even a hint of remorse in her voice. Instead, she shifted the blame onto me, saying that if Alex and I had been truly in love, none of this would have happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister trying to justify betraying me by saying my relationship with Alex wasn't strong enough to survive. But what shocked me even more was what she said next. Emily told me that I had two options. I could accept their relationship and move on, or I could risk being excluded from the family. She made it clear that if I didn't support their marriage, I would be seen as the one tearing the family apart. And to top it all off, she still wanted me to be her maid of honor, not because she thought I'd want to, but because it would keep up appearances. I couldn't believe the nerve. She was asking me to stand by her side at the wedding, smiling and pretending everything was fine, just to avoid family drama. It was unreal. Before I left, Alex texted me too. His message was full of excuses, talking about how things between us had been falling apart for a long time, how he and Emily had just found something special together. He tried to frame it like it was some romantic twist of fate, but his words rang hollow. There was no apology, no real acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. I started digging deeper into their social media, and that's when I found it, a hidden folder on Alex's account, filled with more photos of him and Emily together. Some of them were from months before we broke up, confirming that their affair had been going on far longer than they had admitted. They had been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, and now they were trying to play it off as if it was no big deal. As I sat there staring at the photos, it all became clear. They had been planning this for a long time, and I was the last to know. But now that I had the truth, I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. After finding those hidden photos of Emily and Alex together, I knew I couldn't keep quiet anymore. They had been lying to me for so long, and now they expected me to just play along for the sake of family unity. It wasn't going to happen. I needed to reach out to people who might actually listen to me, people outside of the immediate bubble that was my parents and Emily. So I decided to contact a few relatives who I trusted to have a more objective view. First, I called Aunt Linda, my mom's sister. She'd always been the type to stand up for what was right, even when it made things awkward at family gatherings. I wasn't sure what her reaction would be, but I had to give it a shot. I laid it all out for her, the affair, the lies, the photos, and to my relief, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that Emily and Alex had gone behind my back like that, and that my parents were brushing it all off like it didn't matter. Linda offered me her support right away. She even told me she'd speak to a few other family members, including my cousin Mark, who I knew wouldn't be happy about any of this. Mark was the kind of guy who valued loyalty above all else, and he'd always been close to me. Linda promised to get in touch with him and see what could be done. As the days passed, word started to spread through the extended family. Some of them were as outraged as Linda and Mark, calling me to offer their support, but others, well, they didn't want to get involved. I got the sense that some of them were afraid of rocking the boat, of causing any more family drama, They seemed to believe that it was better to let bygones be bygones and just support Emily's upcoming wedding, no matter what had happened. Then my mom called. Apparently, the tension had reached a point where a full-on family meeting was necessary. She didn't say it outright, but I knew she blamed me for stirring things up. I wasn't exactly looking forward to this meeting, but there was no way I was going to sit quietly while they all pretended that what Emily and Alex did was okay. The family meeting was set for the following Sunday at my parents' house. When I arrived, the tension was already palpable. Everyone was there: my parents, Emily, Alex, Aunt Linda, Mark, and a few other relatives who had been drawn into the situation. The minute I walked in, I could feel the weight of their stares. My parents were clearly not happy that this had blown up beyond their control. My dad was the first to speak, accusing me of trying to tear the family apart over something that was old news. He said that what had happened between Alex, Emily, and me was in the past, and that I was being unreasonable by bringing it all up now. My mom nodded in agreement, adding that I was just jealous of Emily's happiness and that I needed to move on. It took everything in me not to lose my temper right then and there. Instead, I calmly reminded them that this wasn't about the past. It was about how Emily and Alex had lied to me for months, sneaking around behind my back while pretending to be supportive of my relationship with Alex. I showed them the evidence I'd found: the photos, the messages, everything. But my parents weren't having it. My dad told me that if I didn't let it go and start supporting Emily's wedding, he would cut me off financially. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. He was willing to threaten me like that, just to keep the peace. It was beyond frustrating. My mom chimed in again, calling me selfish and saying that I was the one causing all the drama by refusing to forgive and forget. That's when Aunt Linda stepped in. She wasn't having any of it. She stood up for me, telling my parents that they were being unfair by forcing me to accept something so hurtful. She reminded them that Emily and Alex's actions weren't just some minor slip-up. They had betrayed me, and expecting me to simply get over it was unreasonable. Her words seemed to hit a nerve, and I could see a few other relatives nodding in agreement. Mark spoke up too, asking the room why they were all so quick to defend Emily and Alex when it was clear that they had done something wrong. He pointed out that if anyone else in the family had done something like this, they would be held accountable. Why were Emily and Alex being given a free pass? The room grew tense as sides started to form. Some family members began to question Emily and Alex's integrity, while others, including my parents, dug in their heels, insisting that we should all just move on. It was clear that this was going to divide the family, no matter what happened next. As if that weren't enough, Emily started sending me messages after the meeting, demanding that I stop causing problems and stay in line or face consequences. She was desperate to control the narrative, to make it seem like I was the one at fault. Her messages grew more threatening, filled with warnings about how the family would turn on me if I didn't fall in line. It was clear she was panicking, afraid that her picture-perfect wedding was going to be ruined by the truth. Despite all the drama, the wedding plans continued. My mom sent me an itinerary for bridesmaid duties, assuming I'd accepted the role, despite everything that had happened. It was almost laughable. Here they were, moving forward as if I had agreed to play along, pretending like nothing was wrong. But I hadn't agreed, and I wasn't about to. Then, just as I was about to reach my breaking point, I received an anonymous tip. It came through a message on social media from an account I didn't recognize. The message was short and cryptic, but it hinted at something more: another secret involving Emily and Alex that had been kept from me. The person claimed to have information that would blow everything up if it came to light. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done uncovering the truth. As the wedding day approached, it became clear that there was more to this story, and I wasn't going to stop until I had all the pieces. The anonymous message weighed heavily on my mind, and I knew I had to follow up on it. There was something more to this story, and if I was going to finally get closure, I needed to know the full truth. The tip had mentioned Alex's shady past, something I hadn't considered before. At first, I wasn't sure if I should take it seriously, but curiosity got the best of me. If there was even a chance that this person had more information, I had to find out. The message had come from someone claiming to be an ex-coworker of Alex's, someone who had worked closely with him at his previous job. After a few messages back and forth, we arranged to meet in a small cafe on the edge of town. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when I walked in and spotted the man who had messaged me, I could tell by the look on his face that he had something serious to share. We ordered coffee and sat down. He didn't waste any time. He told me that he used to work with Alex at a financial firm, where they handled large accounts for high-profile clients. At first, everything seemed fine. Alex was charming, knew how to work a room, and clients liked him. But over time, this guy began noticing discrepancies in some of the accounts Alex was managing. Money was missing, small amounts at first, but enough to raise suspicion. When he confronted Alex about it, Alex brushed it off, saying it was a mistake and that he'd fix it. But the missing funds kept growing. Eventually, Alex was caught embezzling money from clients' accounts. To avoid a full-blown scandal, the company quietly fired him, offering a severance package in exchange for his silence. They didn't want their reputation tarnished, so Alex got away without facing any legal consequences. But the damage was done. I sat there, stunned as the story unfolded. This was exactly the kind of thing that could ruin someone's life if it came to light, and now Alex was about to marry my sister, with my family none the wiser. The ex-coworker handed me a folder with documents, copies of emails, internal reports, everything I would need to prove that Alex wasn't the man he pretended to be. Armed with this new information, I drove straight to my parents' house. I knew they wouldn't believe me unless I had hard evidence, and now I had it. When I got there, they were in the middle of making final wedding preparations, Emily sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of invitations, and my mom fussing over flower arrangements. I laid the documents in front of them, explaining what I had learned. I told them everything: how Alex had stolen from his former clients, how he had been quietly let go from his job to avoid a scandal, how he had lied to everyone around him. I showed them the emails, the reports, everything. But just like before, my parents refused to listen. My dad barely looked at the papers, waving them away like they were nothing. He accused me of fabricating the whole story just to stop the wedding, claiming that I was jealous of Emily's happiness and wanted to sabotage her relationship. My mom followed suit, insisting that I needed to move on and stop causing trouble for the family. It was like banging my head against a wall. No matter what I said, they were determined to defend Alex and keep their perfect image of him intact. They wouldn't even consider the possibility that I was telling the truth. It was clear that nothing I said or did would change their minds. They had already chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. At that moment, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had spent so much time trying to get them to understand, to see things from my perspective, but it was pointless. They were never going to see it, and I didn't need to stick around for their approval. I made my decision right then and there. I wasn't going to the wedding. I wasn't going to stand up next to Emily and pretend everything was fine. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into playing along for the sake of family harmony. I was done with it. The next day, I sent a formal message to Emily and my parents, explaining that I wouldn't be attending the wedding. I laid out my reasons clearly and respectfully, stating that I couldn't in good conscience support a relationship built on lies and betrayal. I also told them that I was stepping back from family events for the time being, as it was clear that my presence wasn't wanted. On the day of the wedding, instead of being surrounded by people who had betrayed and dismissed me, I spent time with my supportive friends. Lisa and I planned a small gathering at her place, where we ordered takeout, watched movies, and talked about my plans for the future. I had been considering a move to a new city for a while, and now it seemed like the perfect time to start fresh. That sense of freedom, of making decisions for myself without worrying about my family's judgment, was exactly what I needed. The wedding came and went, but the fallout wasn't far behind. A few days later, I started hearing whispers from family members who had attended the wedding. Apparently, things hadn't gone as smoothly as Emily and Alex had hoped. Some of my extended family, those who had supported me, had shown up but made their feelings clear by distancing themselves from the couple. There had been tension during the reception, with a few awkward exchanges and hushed conversations about Alex's past. And then the rumors started. Word of Alex's shady history began to circulate, and it wasn't long before it reached people outside the family. I heard through the grapevine that Alex's job was in jeopardy again, this time because his current employer had caught wind of what had happened at his previous company. Emily, of course, was furious. She tried to pin the blame on me, claiming that I had spread the rumors to sabotage them. A few days later, Emily called me, venting her frustration. She was angry, yes, but there was also regret in her voice. She admitted that things weren't turning out the way she had hoped, that her perfect wedding day had been marred by tension and rumors. But I didn't engage. I had made my peace with the situation, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the drama. Then, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a company I had applied to in a different city. They were offering me a job, a position I had been eyeing for months. It felt like a sign, like the universe was giving me the fresh start I had been craving. I accepted the job and began packing for my move. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I felt a sense of closure. Walking away from my family and the toxicity surrounding them was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but it was also the most empowering. I had finally chosen myself, and that was all that mattered.